Hi, I'm back for part 2 of why I became a nurse and the journey that took me from there to here. In the last episode, I spoke about the pivotal moment that helped me decide that I wanted to become a nurse. If you haven't seen that episode, it's linked here. And in this episode, I want to share a situation that I encountered as a nurse that helped me fall in love with the brain. So once I became a nurse about 20 years ago, I know I don't look a day over 25, my neck just cracked when I did that, showing my age. I kind of fell in love with the high intensity and pressure of the operating theatres. So that's where I started working once I graduated. And I worked in a hospital that had 20 operating theatres. There were 17 when I started, and they've built some since then. And they did most specialties that you can think of, including cardiac, urology, obstetrics, gynecology, and neurosurgery. Now, how it works in most operating theatres with nursing staff, at least in this hospital, is that the nurses kind of have their specialties that they go into, but they're able to help out mostly in all of the specialties. In one of my earliest years of nursing, I was assisting in the neurotheatre for a very fascinating procedure where the surgeons and specialists work together to implant a device in the brain. The device is for something called deep brain stimulation. So it's for people who predominantly have tremors, like for instance, people with Parkinson's disease. And in the operating theatre, the surgeon works in tandem with a specialist to figure out exactly where these electrodes need to go in the patient's brain, and then they switch them on to make them work. Now, how do they know that these electrodes are working? Well, the patient has to be awake. Now, I know this will be starting to sound like a horror story to most people who are watching this and unfamiliar with operative environments, but it's a very safe, controlled situation, and the patient is calm and removed by a barrier from the operative area, but they are awake. So what was fascinating about this to me was that the first time I saw this operation, it was being done on an elderly gentleman with Parkinson's disease, who in his career had been a professional flautist, so he played the flute professionally. And obviously, once his tremors started, he could no longer hold the flute steadily and was unable to play it. So this guy was awake on the table and chatting with everyone while the surgery was happening. Bit weird. But they brought his flute into the operating theatre. And the way that they tested it was that they implanted the electrodes where they needed to be. And when the surgeon was pretty confident that he had them in the right spot, we gave this guy his flute. Now, the electrodes hadn't been turned on at this point, so he was shaking and tremoring, and the specialist told him to try and play the flute. Obviously, he was trying, but he couldn't. It sounded a bit funny. At that point, they turned the electrodes on, and just like that, he stopped tremoring and started playing the flute beautifully. It was an incredible moment, and everybody in the room was overjoyed. No more than the patient, I'm assuming. They flipped the electrode switch off, and he started tremoring again. On, still, off, tremor. It was crazy cool. The brain can do amazing things with the help of technology, but we as humans can do such incredible things. And it was also just such a life-changing moment for this guy who was so proud of himself and so touched that the thing he had built a career off, his lifelong passion of playing the flute, was returned to him. It was just such a beautiful moment. So that was the catalyst. Something was implanted in my brain, a little seed that made me think this was so cool. Funnily enough, that same neurologist, the one who had helped with the implantation of this device into this patient, was a professor who I ended up going to with a family member to help this family member with what turned out to be quite a significant bout of Tourette's. And during this family member's diagnosis, it came to light from the professor that I too have a mild version of Tourette's. It's mostly under control for me now, but you can see it from time to time, particularly if I'm more stressed, which I have been lately. But that was another kind of added layer of interest into what happens with the brain and what was happening with my brain. And bit by bit, year by year, other layers kept getting added to what was piquing my interest. And there were things to do in a business that I owned with neuromarketing that was also fascinating to me. And then particularly when COVID hit and we were running retreats for this business, the primary focus was work-life balance and specifically burnout prevention. By this stage, I was pretty comfortable with explaining the basics of neuroscience in a way that could help people manage how their brains were working for them. But it was 10 years of reading about it, professional education, getting comfortable with it, and figuring out how to teach it in a way that was within my scope of practice. And then, about 2 or 3 years ago, for reasons that I'll address one day, I had a complete crisis of confidence. I lost all faith in my ability to do any kind of job or have any kind of confidence in anything professionally. It took a huge toll on me mentally and psychologically. And the effects of that are ongoing, they're long lasting, and they're deep seated. And if I'm being honest with you, that's one of the main reasons why I'm here. I was listening to an incredible interview with Emily McDonald, who's a neuroscientist and founder of Mindcraft, where she was talking about feeling stuck and how the first step to getting unstuck in your brain is by changing the narrative in your head. And this isn't coming from me, this is coming from a world-renowned neuroscientist. Changing the words in our head works, according to her, and science. So like, for instance, if you're wanting to start a new business, then you simply tell yourself that you're a business owner. You talk to yourself like you already have the thing that you're working towards. This is how she was explaining it. Or like, she was using the example that she was going to be starting a podcast, so she called herself a podcaster, even though she hadn't released the first episode yet. She now identifies as a podcaster. Same thing if you're wanting to write a book, then you would call yourself an author. And I know that can probably feel really strange and maybe a little bit like imposter syndrome. But if you're doing the thing and you're working towards the thing, then you're in the arena. And in my view, you have the right to identify as that thing. So the particular brain regions that are used in this activity of changing the narrative is that it shifts the brain activity from the amygdala, which is like a fear-based center, it's like the brain's alarm system, to the prefrontal cortex, which is where we do our planning. And then it can also release dopamine and oxytocin, which, as we are getting familiar with on this channel, dopamine helps with motivation, and combined with the oxytocin, it's kind of like fostering empathy and like positive reinforcement. And when I listened to this interview with her, I realized that I have all of the tools to undo what has happened to my brain over the last 3 years. And so why don't I utilize them? Why don't I try them out and practice them in real time on my own brain? Why don't I use the science that I feel so comfortable with to reroute my own brain? I know it needs to happen. Yes, I'm stressed. Yes, I'm sleep deprived. Yes, I have a lot going on. But I would hazard a guess that pretty much anyone watching this is in the same boat. It's not a competition. We're all going through it. At least anybody who's drawn to watching this is. So I think that's what I'm going to commit to do. There must be so many of you out there in my position who are feeling stuck for whatever reason. Are you feeling like you can't corroborate your thoughts? Do you have a goal but you're feeling like it's incapable for you to like take the first, or maybe not even just the first, but the next step towards it? There are real brain things that are happening here. And I feel like if I can walk through it with you and we can take the steps together, using the right neuroscience, then maybe we can both feel like we're not doing it alone. If this feels like you, then that's where we're going to be going. I'm going to be doing it regardless whether you're here or not. But to be honest, I prefer not to be doing it alone. Having 1 or 2 people along the way would make me feel a lot better. If that's you, I'm excited. Let me know what you're stuck with. What's holding you back? Do you even know what's holding you back? Sometimes we can know we're stuck, but we can't even identify how or why. The key takeaway, at least from this, would be what Emily McDonald had to say in her interview this morning. And that was changing the narrative. It's as simple as that. Telling ourselves a different story. So let's start there. That's today's job. Whatever it is that you're working towards, you've got one simple task, and that is to identify with it like it's already done. And I'm going to do that too. I'll try it over this week and I'll check back in with you next week to see how it went. Anyway, I hope that helped. I think in the next episode, I'm actually going to break down the actual brain and the areas of it. Like, I'm a very conceptual person. I've never been good with maths or chemistry. Like, I hate that stuff. Looking at numbers and letters is not my strong suit. In my uni days, I loved like anatomy and physiology. The stuff where I could see an idea in actual real life, that really helped me learn. So I think I want to actually go over the basics of the brain so that when we talk about the areas of the brain that are being activated or changed or rewired throughout this process, you can have a better understanding of what they are. And also clinical terminology. I have some tricks of the trade that I learned in my training to help remember certain words and like certain areas of the brain. So if you want to hear that, or if you want to be able to remember the different parts of the brain and what they actually do, let me know in the comments, because I'm happy to provide that as well. And I think it will help us moving forward. Anyway, that's enough of that. Part 2 of my nursing story sort of pivoted into a neuroscience hack, but that's me. Welcome to the channel. All right, well, have a good rest of the day. Take care of yourself. I appreciate you. I'll talk to you soon.